Trudeau's radical plans to change Canada. I'm Brian Lilley with the Rebel.media. Justin Trudeau is promising to fundamentally transform Canada once again, not only with his plans to overthrow our Westminster-style system, but also his plans for completely changing Aboriginal relations in Canada. The Liberal leader went to the Assembly of First Nations annual general meeting in Montreal and said the Harper government has failed First Nations and promised that he won't. See, he wants a brand new relationship with Canada's First Nations. In a statement, Trudeau said, quote, "A Liberal government will recognize Aboriginal governments as full partners in the Federation and will work with Indigenous peoples to create fairness and equality of opportunity in Canada." End quote. Now, what does that mean? I've asked his office to clarify. They haven't gotten back to me. What does it mean, full partner? Does it mean that Aboriginal governments are equal to a province? Does each and every band across the country have the same voice as a province? That, to me, is the plain meaning of those words. The Federation is the Federation of Provinces. In Canada, there's more than 600 bands, so each one of them is entitled to a certain amount of self-government. If they're full partners in the Federation, as Trudeau promises, does that mean they get to have senators? I mean, he wants to keep the Senate. He wants provinces to have their say in Parliament. Okay, so does each band get their own senator? You could take that as a throwaway line, but it won't be taken that way by the people hearing it. He said full partners. When you show up and make promises like this, people expect that you're going to act on those promises. This goes beyond what I already consider the dangerous talk of nation-to-nation relationships, the kind of pap that all politicians in this country deal in. When you say nation-to-nation, you're essentially saying that each band is a nation, that they are sovereign, they are separate from Canada. See, words have meaning, but that's something that too many politicians, Trudeau included, seem to forget. He's promising that nation-to-nation relationship, but he's also promising to put UN declarations above Canadian law.
When I say that we must complete the unfinished work of Confederation, I mean that Canada needs a renewed nation-to-nation relationship with Aboriginal communities. A relationship based on recognition, rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. One that is rooted in the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
The Harper government never should have signed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I know that they were under pressure to do so, and they did. They say it's an aspirational document that doesn't supersede Canadian law. Well, let me tell you, if the NDP or Liberals form government, it will be considered higher than anything Parliament could ever pass. And that is surrendering sovereignty to the UN. Never a good idea. Beyond surrendering sovereignty to the UN and promising to make each and every band across Canada equal to a province like Ontario, Alberta, or Prince Edward Island, Trudeau is also promising an ethnic veto of legislation.
We will conduct a full review of the legislation unilaterally imposed on Aboriginal peoples by the Harper government.
Hold on there a minute. Hold on. What does unilaterally imposed mean? What's he talking about? Is he saying that Stephen Harper stood up one day and decreed something? No. Trudeau's talking about legislation. Legislation passed by Parliament. Legislation that was drafted, studied, debated, and voted on by the men and women elected from across Canada by millions of voters. Now, Trudeau may not like that legislation, but it's not unilaterally imposed. This is how Canada's representative democracy works. And I would expect that someone whose father was Prime Minister, someone who grew up at 24 Sussex Drive, and who spent a lot of time at university to understand that. Now, let's listen to his statement again, but I'm going to let him finish out his thought and give it some context.
A full review of the legislation unilaterally imposed on Aboriginal peoples by the Harper government through the lens of Section 35 of the Constitution, where measures are found to be in conflict with Aboriginal rights, where they are inconsistent with the principles of good governance, or where they simply make no public policy sense, we will rescind them.
That's probably not the level of applause that Trudeau was hoping for there. So what legislation specifically is he talking about? What will he rescind? Well, he does talk a bit about C-51, the anti-terror bill, but as for legislation unilaterally imposed on Aboriginal people, he mentioned 3 specific acts of Parliament in his speech. the Safe Drinking Water Act for First Nations, the Family Homes on Reserves and Matrimony Interest Act, and the First Nations Financial Transparency Act. That last one, that's the law that forces chiefs and councils to open up the books and show how they spend billions doled out by Ottawa. It's the law that exposed Ron Giesbrecht, the $1 million chief from near Vancouver, whose big payday caused such an uproar. The Safe Drinking Water Act, that's about ensuring safe drinking water on reserves, giving out resources, but also spelling out responsibilities for band councils. And finally, the Matrimonial Act, that's about giving women on reserves the same rights to the matrimonial home that women off reserve in the rest of Canada have had for decades. I can't believe it took this long to get to that point. I can't believe Trudeau opposes this, but he does. Just like he opposes making band councils responsible for safe drinking water or requiring transparency from those councils. He opposes all of it. So Trudeau says nothing unilaterally imposed. Well, if he considers a vote in Parliament on legislation to be unilaterally imposing, if he's promised to make Aboriginal governments full partners in the Federation, and if he's promising, as he did in Montreal, nothing passed without full and informed consent, something that already exists, well, what he's really promising is to bring Canada to a standstill, to say our existing form of government will be subject to the whims of more than 600 bands across the country. That is the sum of the plain language meaning of his words. So either he doesn't mean it, which is possible, or worse, he does mean it, and he hasn't thought about the consequences of his promises. AFN National Chief Perry Belgrade told the attendees of his conference that the First Nations votes can have an impact on 51 ridings in this next federal election, and he encouraged everyone to do what they can to dump Stephen Harper and the Conservatives. He wants a different Canada, and Justin Trudeau has promised to give him everything he wants and more. If Trudeau and the Liberals win in October, the fundamental transformation of Canada will truly be underway.